Hello, Blue Foster here. That's what I would do to you if you were a cucumber. I'm talking about two authors, David Foster Wallace and Stephen King here. And a strange connection I've found between them. I've been doing this thing lately where while I've been reading, I cannot stop drawing connections, usually between two works, but sometimes it starts to web out. And I want to eventually talk about those things. But I'm just going to talk about a simple one that just happened. It hasn't had time to web out. I was reading Oblivion. By David Foster Wallace. My first thing I ever read from Oblivion was Incantations of Burned Children, that super grim story about a toddler baby getting burnt. Crazy. So dark, so good. His story, not from this book, but his story, Forever Overhead, was always a favorite for me. I think for a while was my favorite story ever until I discovered the source. Until I started reading John Updike, which it feels like he's really kind of doing in that story. And then The Happiest I've Been became my favorite short story for a while. Anywho, I was reading Oblivion and I read the first long story, Mr. Squishy, which is about essentially a targeted focus group session and then all the layers of bureaucratic, absurd focus groupery going on and sort of marketplace targeting experiments. And it's silly. It's very much his thing. It's all about boredom. It's about job and the way that the man thinks and his hopeless crush on his coworker. And it's sort of jumping between these few viewpoints. It was awesome. It was good. But I noticed something in it that caught my eye. And I saw that David Foster Wallace did the old hyphen trick. When you do a word that starts with a hyphen to imply that the previous initial word would be appended onto the back of it. When you see it, you'll know what it is. And it was like a clever little trick that I first saw in Adam Levin's The Instructions, which I love, which is actually my favorite book ever.
This one is incredible, and I think this is on par. I could have guessed that this was William H. Gass. I hate him the way the tongues of smart girls prefer bittersweet chocolate to milk. And you've put bittersweet together, and so that when you end on milk, it has a hyphen to denote milk chocolate. And even down to that level, I think is just really telling of these great sentences.
And I was like, okay. So I know that Levin is a David Foster Wallace fan, and I'm seeing David Foster Wallace do this here. I'm guessing he got it from him, and I was like, it's just a little trick maybe that David Foster Wallace thought up, because he was always doing little, like, semi-linguistic, like, clever little things like that. So I was like, okay, cool. That's awesome. Then I started reading Cujo by Stephen King. And this is the last place I expected to see any similarity with like David Foster Wallace. And I saw him do the hyphen thing. And I thought, oh my fucking God, how far back is it going to go? It's coming from Stephen King. Of course, it made me think, okay, so maybe it is just like more of a convention. It's something that plenty of other people have done. And it probably is. But it just tinkled in my little brain. I was like, okay, cool. Here's someone even earlier doing that exact same hyphen thing. And I just wrote it off. I was like, okay, cool, interesting. And then one of the main characters, Vic, is an ad man. And him and his ad man partner, it was their history being discussed and the various like ad jobs they have done. And they were doing an ad. It's for a cookie company, an ad he did for a cookie company. And I came across a sentence that I felt like could absolutely have been inside of that David Foster Wallace story, Mr. Squishy. And no one would have been any the wiser. I'm going to read the paragraph lead up to it, and then I will point out the actual sentence. The paragraph is pretty similar too. Their campaign had been a sweeping one. For sharp cookies, Vic and Roger had developed the cookie sharpshooter, a bumbling Western peace officer whose 6 guns shot cookies instead of bullets, courtesy of the special effects people. Chocolate chippers in some spots, ginger snappies in others, oh those oatmeals and still others. The spots always ended with the sharpshooter standing sadly in a pile of cookies with his guns out. Well, the bad guys got away. He'd tell millions of Americans every day or so. But I got the cookies. Best cookies in the West, or anywhere else, I reckon. The sharpshooter bites into a cookie. This is it. His expression suggests that he is experiencing the gastronomic equivalent of a boy's first orgasm. Fade out. It's just that, like, that dry humor, the use of gastronomic, that's a very, like, David Foster Wallace construction. That kind of wry, his expression suggests that he is experiencing the gastronomic equivalent of a boy's first orgasm. Something almost like textbooky about the way that it's written. I don't know exactly how to put it into words, but I just feel like you could have thrown that sentence in there and it would have fit perfectly with his style. With that sentence preceded by the, like, taking seriously of the sharpshooter mascot and describing it so matter-of-factly, it's just weird. Those two things in a row that reminded me so heavily of David Foster Wallace. It's just weird. It's just the last place I would expect to see it. Thank you for your time. I'm actually back. What it also made me think of was Stephen King is like an oddly good reader. He's always seemed like an oddly good reader to me. And he's somebody that I think people write off as a stylist because he has almost a colloquial way of writing sometimes. He has a pretty unadorned way of writing sometimes. But I think also when a work becomes so ubiquitous, it loses the strange shimmer of its originality. Not to say that he's like the most original writer ever, but it's like SpongeBob. Sometimes I think about this with like SpongeBob SquarePants. What a strange creation that is, but we kind of just take it for granted because a lot of us grew up with it and have seen it for about 1 million years. But it really is a strange little thing that was inspired by fucking Ween's album, The Mollusk, which is, as strange as you can go. So I think that he's underrated as a stylist. And so I think by extension, people don't imagine that he has like a super literary
taste.
And he is, though, like seriously, a great reader. There's this great story that Bradford Morrow told at this like William Gass conference celebration thing of his life and work.
But I was out of Princeton, and Joyce Carol Oates, my colleague there, had invited Stephen King to come give a reading. So King got up there, and he's 7 feet tall. We introduced him, and it's like, I'm not short, but I was like, Stephen. So he's big, and he got up there, and he had a book that I recognized in his hand, and I thought, what is up with that? He said, I've got this book. It's by a writer you may never have heard of. I hadn't heard of him before, but this is genius. So this is going to be a long reading because I'm going to read my own stuff too, and if you get bored, you can just walk out, and I will not be offended. And then he said, okay, so listen to this. He said, and he read, my dad wouldn't let me have a dog. A dog we don't need. My mom made the neighbor spits her pal by poisoning it with the gin she sprinkled on the table scraps. And then he was like, isn't that amazing? He said, this is William H. Gass. I never heard of this guy before. Then he went on, he read the entire fugue. He spent the first half hour of his reading The Tunnel.
Enjoying and sharing with the audience the awesomeness of William Gass's prose. And what an annoying sentence. But that's just like, it's so out of character for how people characterize him. I think that he really is a great reader. He has some awesome recommendations for stuff. Like if you look at his list, he's got like Underworld by Don DeLillo on there. He's got some William Faulkner, blah, blah, blah. He's also talked about loving Stankey Elkin. He's also admired John Updike. And Updike's not such a crazy shout, but like seeing Elkin and William Gass and Don DeLillo,
It shows that he's an open-minded reader.
there's this guy Don Robertson, a forgotten novelist essentially, and he talked about how in high school him and his friend would like obsessively pore over his novels line by line. There's this guy, what's his name, Thomas Williams, and he's talked about his admiration for him. And I decided to pick up his book Whipple's Castle, and it was very lyrical, very gorgeously written. He has at least taste that I identify with, taste that deepens him to me. People write him off, but I think that he's a great reader at the very least, and that's cool. And he has this whole thing about high and low where he's like, more reviewers need to be reading like John Grisham, etc.
And also, David Foster Wallace once submitted a list of 10 favorite novels that was like Stephen King and Tom Clancy and Erica Jong and stuff, and regularly would champion like unpretentiousness and straightforwardness.
And it reminds me of Michael Silverblatt in that great video on YouTube where Michael Silverblatt is talking about his love of reading and what it's done for him. And he talks about how he always was obsessed with like puzzle box novels, just like the postmodern, like difficult to figure out, more strange works of fiction. That was his whole wheelhouse. And he realized if he wanted to be a critic, he had to learn to meet a way broader field of books on their own terms, and to learn to see what is seeable in them, and to learn to love books that are totally outside of his wheelhouse. And that is like one of the best qualities ever about Michael Silverblatt to me. Rest in peace, by the way, the best. And I feel like Stephen King, in a way, embodies that as well. He just doesn't tend to talk about his more strange tastes. I think that he feels that what needs championing a lot more is the stuff that people write off as popular. Just interesting. I don't think he's literally Michael Silverblatt, but I just think he's more interesting than meets the eye. And at the very least, he's an extremely entertaining speaker. And I love listening and re-listening to his lectures and his talks and interviews on YouTube. But yeah, I just thought this was interesting. There's a weird connection. I didn't know why I opened Cujo and it had these similarities in that sentence that is so beyond similar to David Foster Wallace that it's insane. I don't know.